frustrerad och gaslightad och liksom vansinnig. Alltså, som att jag håller på att tappa liksom, koncepten helt och hållet. Även fast det liksom finns vissa positiva liksom vindar som blåser, att folk säger att det vänder nu, att liksom medierna börjar haka på bla bla bla, så är det också samtidigt liksom, men vi hade någon morgon här liksom i Gott snack där vi liksom pratade lite om 9/11 och det liksom blir bara så här, folk som är så här, men jag tror oftast på den enklaste förklaringen. Varför skulle de göra så? De skulle aldrig vilja visa sig så sårbara. De skulle väl aldrig, det känns lite krystat, det känns lite långsökt. Man bara, ja, vad fint att du tror på USAs djupa statsnarrativ. Vad skönt det måste vara. Men liksom, jag känner mig så som att jag har blivit en annan art av människa som är bara så här, jag kan inte prata med andra människor som är så liksom naiva. Jag blir galen. Ja.
Men handlade det om själva 9/11 conspiracy?
Ja, men liksom generellt också. Det var ju det vi pratade om, men liksom, det handlar också om bara så här, alla andra gånger liksom terrorbrott eller terror har använts av Israel och kanske med hjälp av USA för att liksom dra igång, få skapa samtycke för att dra igång konflikter. Och när folk är så typ klappar den på huvudet nästan och fnyser åt den, då blir jag bara så här, det är du som inte har läst på.
Ja, nej men det är precis, det är det som är så störigt, att det ska att man själv hamnar
foliehattslådan liksom.
Ja, precis. Men det är som du säger, det är de som inte kan någonting överhuvudtaget som matades in av propagandan. Men det är, alltså, själva propagandan är ju livslång. Så.
Ja, men också vill säga bara, men de har ju visat massa utredningar typ så här, stål kan visst smälta. Man bara, och vem har beställt den utredningen då? Var kommer den ifrån? Alltså bara så här, litar du på en utredning från en myndighet i USA? Alltså så här, då är du också bara helt väck, förlåt. Men alltså. Ja,
nej men precis. Det är verkligen så. Men alltså den här propagandan, det är inte temporärt.
Nej.
Det har liksom pågått sedan andra världskriget.
Ja.
Så det är verkligen indoktrinering och det är inte så lätt att motarbeta.
Nej.
Men också, samtidigt har vi alltså det här folkmordet, det är ju, vi behöver använda den för att väcka folk.
Men så här, om USA är villiga att hjälpa till med det här vår tids förintelse, hur kan du tro att de inte kan göra vad som helst då? Hur kan du fortfarande ha något förtroende kvar för den här mordiska psykopatstaten?
Exakt så. Nej, men jag håller helt med. Men på ett sätt, ja, alltså jag vet inte, det är så svårt att, för man blir ju sur, man blir ledsen, man blir arg, och det påverkar hur man pratar också, och sen blir man hårdare och hårdare. Och sen blir det svårt att nå folk just för att de är så långt borta. Jag märker också, jag blir bara kallare och kallare, argare och argare, stöter bara bort folk mer och mer. Och det är liksom inte vägen framåt. Det är ju, där är Kajsa ganska bra på att vara så här lite autistisk och vara så här, vi måste så här, bjuda in folk, vi måste vara snälla mot alla. Jag var så här, jag förstår att det här är det smartaste sättet att nå dit man vill. Men det är liksom svårt att man också har typ borderline och är missbrukare och liksom är en svajig person. Ja, men samtidigt, det finns ju folk som är lika arga. Det har hänt flera gånger att liksom, med tanke på mina inlägg, liksom att folk har sagt, ja men precis, jag har stört mig på detta jättelänge och ingen pratar om det, men nu äntligen liksom. Så det finns de som väntar någon annan att göra saker och prata som de tänker, för de får inte utrymme. Och ingen annan liknande får utrymme också. Så jag tror vi behöver skapa utrymmet. Och bli arg. För liksom, om man inte är arg nu, när ska man bli arg?
Exakt. Men det är också det, så här, att folk inte är mer arga gör ju också, man känner bara helt så här, helt gaslightad och rasande. Vad håller ni på med? Alltså bara så här, jag trodde typ att du var en bra människa. Typ, vem är du? Alltså, känner jag dig? Är vi samma art typ?
Ja, precis.
Och så liksom det här jävla liksom, så här, hör jag en gång till liksom ordet antisemitism, då tror jag faktiskt jag spränger mig själv i huvudet alltså.
Vi kommer ju höra det idag, så hoppas du.
Ja, jo, men det här är ändå i rätt kontext. Jag tyckte det var så befriande. Jag såg en intervju igår med Aron Mate som pratade om så här. Alltså det var verkligen så. Det han sa, om en svensk politiker hade sagt det han sa, så hade han blivit cancellad alltså på 1 minut. Bara så här, it's the Jewish billionaire donor class. Och hon var typ så här, inte det lite en antisemitisk trop? Han bara, jo, tyvärr så bekräftar de den myten. Han bara, helvete vad uppfriskande att någon säger att det finns vissa svinrika judar som använder sin makt för att liksom stoppandet av folkmordet så att säga. Med liksom universitetschefer och rektorer som blir kanslade, kongressledamöter som blir liksom av APAC utmanövrerade. Det var så jävla befriande att sitta honom där helt jävla steadfast och bara så här, ja, tyvärr så lever de ju upp till den antisemitiska stereotypa myten, men liksom, det finns ingen jävla rasism mot judar i västvärlden.
Det är inte vårt fel liksom.
Nej, exakt.
Det är inte vårt fel att det, liksom, de får skylla sig själva.
Ja, gör inte så då. Alltså, det är som liksom så här, som om jag skulle liksom bara så här, bögar, de vill ofta mellon och så går jag på alla mellon och så bara, men alltså, gör inte det då om du inte vill liksom passa in i fördomsmallen då liksom. Eller så får du bara äga det, säga jag älskar mellon, det är en fördom som stämmer. Okej.
Precis.
Berätta om den här Asa då som vi ska prata med. Asa, förlåt.
Nej, alltså, jag har gjort samma misstag i en hel månad.
Ja.
Så ja. Han kommer ju introducera sig själv förhoppningsvis. Men han är en associate editor på Electronic Intifada. Bästa nyhetssidan för Palestina-relaterade nyheter. Har sysslat med det här i 20 år. Han är från Wales och han har rapporterat om just Corbyn-fallet i England eller i UK. Det vill säga när Jeremy Corbyn blev puttad på grund av en antisemitism-drev. Corbyn var Labours ledare. Jag tror i 5 år var det. Mellan 2015 och 2020. Alltså det var en otrolig drev. Jag minns det, för det var väldigt hoppfullt ett litet tag att kanske en sansad människa som Corbyn skulle kunna vara premiärminister i UK. Och de gjorde allt för att stoppa honom. Och just vapnet som de valde var antisemitism. Vi måste dismantla det vapnet under vår generation. Precis.
Det är det som är mitt mål.
Ja. Och Asa har rapporterat väldigt mycket om det. Och så pass mycket att till slut kunna skriva en bok om det. Så själva boken heter Weaponising Anti-semitism med undertitel How the Israeli Lobby brought down Jeremy Corbyn, or Israel Lobby.
Men det här känns för mig, jag har ändå liksom läst på om det här lite grann. Det här har funnits i min begreppsvärld ett tag nu, men jag minns när vi hade så Anders Lindberg som ändå är typ så här chefen på debattsidan på Aftonbladet här, och jag försökte prata med honom om det här. Han bara, det var som att han kunde inte ens ta in begreppet liksom. Alltså, han var bara helt blank och bara så här, nej men alltså om de bränner Israels flagga, det är antisemitism, det måste man också ta på allvar, det måste man också kunna säga att det är antisemitism. Jag bara, du förstår liksom inte det här begreppet.
Nej.
Så komplicerat är det ju inte.
Nej, men det är väldigt, väldigt få i Sverige som tänker så. Som vi gör om detta.
Det är så jävla läskigt.
Eller liksom, det är mycket fler när man tittar på folket. Jag tror folk fattar nu att när de hör ordet antisemitism då bara men
det är ingen som säger det i agenda liksom. Bara så här, håll käften nu. Det där är bara så weaponized. Kom ett riktigt argument istället.
Verkligen. Inget i medieeliten, det finns inte. För alla dessa människor på något vänster är utbildade av typ SKMA eller något liknande. Svenska kommittén mot antisemitism. Och jag vill prata om det med Asa också. För det är exakt samma strukturer. Det är typ 10 olika lobbyorganisationer som jagar verkligen folk ständigt. Jagar deras likes och sånt. Precis som det hände Lorena och andra. Det är inte bara Lorena, det är flera andra som råkade på det också. Och då det slutar med men nu ska Vänsterpartiet utbilda sig om antisemitism av SKMA som är sionister liksom. Okay. Så liksom man verkligen utbildas. Alltså till och med folk som Ali Esbati och Bilan Osman och dylikt. Alla är ju
som man
på
trodde
något sätt
var lite liksom reko ändå.
Ja, precis. Ja, men, och vi har ju sett det liksom. Så jag tror det handlar om att till slut hela den här eliten är på något sätt utbildad av organisationer som SKMA som lindar in sin sionism i antirasism egentligen.
Det där måste man kunna liksom dechiffrera och montera ner om man är en tänkande människa. Alltså det är för dåligt.
Precis. Ja, men precis.
Också den här jävla särställningen, alltså så här, alltså att folk på riktigt verkar tycka det bara så här, antisemitism är värd en annan, vad var det Ulf Kristersson sa? Den har en speciell ställning. Man bara, varför då? Varför då? Det kan du inte motivera om du inte är rasist.
Nej, precis. Alltså det är för att anledningen är att vi är ju i Europa och Europa har vi en skuld mot det, och det. Så
därför ska vi tillåta det en gång till istället.
Ja, till någon annan då.
Ja, exakt. Skicka vidare stafettpinnen liksom.
Ja, precis.
Nej, det är någonting med det där som är så otroligt provocerande, att folk är så ängsliga att de liksom, det är värre att bli kallad antisemit än att liksom försöka stoppa ett folkmord.
Yeah.
Det är på den nivån det är, och då är det någonting som är riktigt jävla skevt.
Ja, verkligen vrickad. Och det är liksom, det finns också många nivåer på det. Det finns det du säger, men sen finns det också, absolut, vi måste stoppa folkmordet, men vi måste göra det utan att bli antisemiter.
Jag kan inte gå i demonstrationen, för då kanske det är någon flaggad som Hezbollah eller Hamas flagga, och då är det inte värt det för mig. Man bara, rasist. Ja,
precis. Ja, men det är ju så, men folk fattar inte det.
Nej.
Folk förstår inte att det är rasism.
Nej.
För det går. Det är kopplat till det här med terrorstämpling.
Ja, för om någon har sagt att det är en terroristorganisation,
då är det
så. Då är det bara så. Då behöver inte jag tänka själv. Då behöver inte jag liksom sätta mig in i situationen. De sa på tv att det är en terrororganisation. Då är det det.
Jag har många diskussioner på Instagram med folk. Inte för att liksom, Instagram är ju så fruktansvärt dåligt på att föra samtal med folk. Jag tycker att det är en horribel plattform för det. Men jag gör det ändå, för det liksom ger ett hum om hur folk tänker. Och det här med terrorism, det var någon som kallade Hamas för terror, och det är bara, och hon sa, men jag bara använder rätta ord.
Spade för en spade.
Ja, precis.
Men vet du vad, då kommer jag kalla dig för en rasist, för det är en spade för mig.
Ja, alltså vad är det för, du kan tänka så, det är okej att liksom tänka så, om man säger, men officiellt enligt dessa och dessa. Visst, absolut. Men who the fuck are you att säga rätta namn på rätta saker? Nej, det man fattar, det är i grund och botten privilegiet som att vara en västerlänning.
Jag såg också bara så här på Bianca Meijers story. Man tänker att hon också kanske börjar komma runt lite grann, men bara så här, kan inte fatta att folk tycker att de ska ha Hamas som styr det. Bara så här, svarade bara så här, varför ska vi ha en åsikt om vem som styr hos dem? Skulle du tycka att det var rimligt om Gazaborna bestämde om Tidöregeringen skulle störtas eller inte? Man bara så här, den här koloniala hatten sitter så fast att de inte ens ser den. Alltså det är så indoktrinerat att vi ska bestämma hur de ska få leva sina liv.
Ja, för vi kan bäst allt. Allt kan vi.
Ja.
Det är liksom, även om våra regeringar stöttar folkmord aktivt. Det är ändå, vi är fortfarande de bästa.
De vuxna i rummet.
Ja, precis. Som tillåter allt och bla bla.
Vad var också hon, kärringen, utrikesministern som var det SvD bara så här, folk gapar inte på mig om att jag inte pratar om Sudan, och där händer också hemskheter. Man bara, du ska alltså vara en folkvald politiker, och det här är liksom din whataboutism liksom, retorik. Ja,
och det är också
alla.
De flesta som bryr sig om Palestina, när de hör och lär sig känna om Sudan.
Ja, det är inte så att de bara så här, nej, det skiter jag fullständigt i. Det är bara när judar mördar som jag bryr mig. Alltså, man
det är också samma aktörer som orsakade det. Det är liksom, det är imperiet som orsakade det. Och fortfarande stöttar det liksom. Så det är absurd.
Ja. Hur går det för Asa? Asa Rocky?
Han är på väg.
Ja.
Han sa give me 5 minutes or so.
Okej. Nice. Vi har ingen kaffe. Men kul att se dig igen. Vad har du tänkt på sen sist? Nu var det jag som rantade lite här, sorry.
Nej, det är lugnt. Det är alltså likadana saker. Det är inte så mycket annat. Det här med Cecilia Odén hade...
Ja.
Alltså länge hade den liksom stört mig.
Ja,
för jag minns att jag liksom lyssnade från dina inlägg tidigare eller någon annan.
Ja.
Varje gång blev jag såhär, vad är det här? Och varför tycker folk att detta är bra?
Det här är en annan typ av provokation. Inte när folk säger dumma saker, men när folk hyllar människor som inte riktigt eller som är så här, de är lite off liksom, eller så här, de har, det finns fortfarande den här hatten, den koloniala liksom, hatten på, som fortfarande liksom inte kan liksom erkänna Hamas rätt till väpnat motstånd, skulle de ju aldrig kunna säga, det känns som. Men att folk är bara så här, hon är helt fantastisk, du måste lyssna på hennes sommarprat och hon är helt opartisk. Jag bara, well, is she really though? Om du förstår liksom nej, det här är en ytlig analys, gumman.
Och det där med
gå hem och
alltså folks svar på inlägget var, men hon är ju på public service,
hon måste vara lite sionist liksom.
Alltså,
hon måste erkänna Israels rätt att existera.
Även om man accepterar det. Bara lyssna på hennes sommarprat. Hennes sommarprat är ju inte hennes uppdrag.
Nej.
Där får hon ju uttrycka sig hur som helst egentligen.
Ja, efter vissa ramar.
Ja, men där kunde hon ändå liksom visa sina
true colors.
Och det har hon gjort.
Ja, jag har inte lyssnat. Alltså, jag försöker akta mitt blodtryck, men
ja, absolut. Gör du det. Men det är liksom, jag lyssnade på hennes sommarprat och 2 olika program där hon var medverkande. Och hon är en sionist. Det är liksom, det går inte. Det här med problemet med tvåstatslösningen är att ingen kan garantera Israels säkerhet.
Det där, hello.
Hi.
Hey.
Welcome, Asa.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start, we just have to start with 2 questions, as we always do. Do you condemn Hamas, and do you accept Israel's right to exist?
No and no.
That's the right answers. Otherwise, we will just cancel the interview.
And that's a wrap.
My name is Fredrik. I'm sitting here in my little radio studio in Stockholm, Sweden, Söderholm. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Fredrik.
And I'm Mehmet. I've been writing to you. I
Hi,
was in
Mehmet.
Sweden. I'm in southern Sweden, though. So we're running this online. The name of our podcast is Peacemongers in English. It's in Swedish, but yeah. So we're trying to undermine the 100 years of imperialist propaganda that has been covering our heads.
And I don't know if you know this, but it's a ride.
Peacemongers, I like that. That's good.
Let's hope that we can live up to the name.
Where are you?
What is it in Swedish?
Fredshetsarna.
Fredshetsarna.
Fred is peace, and hets is to monger.
So my name is Fredrik. Fred, peace, rich. I'm rich of peace.
Oh, that's lovely.
Where are you located, sir?
London.
Beautiful.
But you're from Wales originally, right?
That's right, yeah.
Cool.
Cymru.
We have just ranted a little bit by ourselves about weaponized anti-Semitism, among other things, and it was a little blood pressure riser for me.
I read the questions you sent. It sounds good. So, yeah.
Yeah, we can start
Jump
right away.
into it.
And I mean, our rant was more or less part of what we're going to talk about, anyways. So,
all right.
So, I mean, I've been following you for a long time, but I'm not sure our audience knows you so well. So, if you could introduce yourself, maybe Electronic Intifada a bit, and what you do there, and then maybe how you were engaged in the question of Palestine. Just to give people an idea who you are.
Okay, I'll start now.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, you're recording already.
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. So, hi, I'm Asa Winstanley. I am an associate editor with the Electronic Intifada. I'm an investigative journalist with the Electronic Intifada. We are, I would say, the world's best English language news source on Palestine. And I've been associate editor there for 13 years, been writing there for a bit longer than that. And I've been writing about Palestine in one way or another probably for about 20 years. Before that, I was an activist in the International Solidarity Movement, who I'm sure your audience is familiar with because I met lots of Swedish people in the ISM. When I was involved in ISM in the West Bank, I ended up doing a lot of media work. And then that kind of transitioned into journalism because it's like, we spent all our time trying to get the attention of mainstream media journalists in Jerusalem, usually based in Jerusalem, for Israel's crimes in the West Bank or in Gaza, although I personally never went to Gaza, but you spend all your time doing this, running around, and that was in the days of actually fax machines were still being used. So I we had this old beat up computer with a modem that would send our press releases to fax machines in Jerusalem, and then just calling around mainstream organizations saying, look, this person's just been shot. Don't you think you should cover this? And them saying, oh yeah, we'll look into it, and then doing nothing about it.
We'll investigate it.
Yeah, so like in the spirit of like the old indie media movement, it was sort of a case of, well, why are we bothering with this fruitless task when we can actually write about this stuff ourselves? And that's really how I got involved in Electronic Intifada, basically. So
yeah. I mean, I forgot to say that we're truly honored to have you. I mean, Electronic Intifada is definitely the best source in English out there.
Thank you.
And you do every week. I think I've told this before already, but you do a live stream every week.
That's right.
Since the start of the genocide. I mean, fast-tracked genocide, I'd say. And people definitely should check it out. It's Thursdays at 6 o'clock Central European time. So do check it out if you're still, for some reason, not doing it. You definitely should.
Can you support through Patreon or something like that?
It's not on Patreon, but there is. If you go to our website, electronicintifada.net, and you click on Donate Now, you can make a one-off gift or a recurring.
Or do as I do, a monthly one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You were recently detained by the UK government. Well, not detained, actually. They confiscated your devices, rather, right?
Well, it's debatable whether I was detained, but I wasn't arrested. I thought I was going to be arrested, but I wasn't. I mean, I was effectively detained. Okay, so here's what happened. Right? My home was raided, an at-dawn raid by police, and they spent several hours searching the premises, and they confiscated all the devices or most of the devices that I use for my journalism. So my 2 computers, 2 phones, an iPad, a hard drive, and an empty phone box. And I thought I was going to be arrested because they said they were Counter-Terror Command, which is, the anti-terrorist squad of the Metropolitan Police, London's police. It was only when I spoke over the phone to my lawyer that I discovered they weren't actually arresting me. So, I mean, I was effectively detained because I couldn't really go anywhere while they were searching the home. But yeah, anyway, the point is that it was a raid, and it was an unlawful raid, as it turns out.
And that happened to other people as well, similar stuff, right?
Yeah.
Because of their outspokenness about the issue. Because this was, I mean, just to be clear, this was about your stance and your. Was it about a tweet or was it about like an article or something?
So on the morning of the raid, they wouldn't tell me exactly. They would only say it relates to social media posts you've made, and they refused to tell me which ones. In subsequent legal action, my lawyers managed to obtain 2 reports that had been prepared by the police's. It's called something like the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit, where they basically trawl your social media. And there was 80 pages of my tweets where I can't get into what they said for the time being, but it was essentially just a very wide range of journalistic postings to my Twitter account. So it was a lot of tweets, and it relates to my journalism. And so last week, so this was in October last year, October 2024, this raid happened, and then I had to go through this process of. It's a massive inconvenience, especially as a journalist. But for anyone, losing your phone, laptops, devices, they're such a integral part of the way we live our lives now. It takes a while to get back up on your feet. And so, obviously I had things backed up to the cloud and encryption and whatnot. But it's a bit of a process. And also it's a blow because it's like, well, what are they going to do next? And they're saying there's an ongoing criminal investigation. They're saying they're investigating what things that I've written. And so that was what I had to go through. First I had to replace all my devices and so on and so forth, try and get back to writing. But it was, we decided to resist what they were doing. And my lawyers were very quickly able to ascertain that the warrants that they'd used to search the property, my home, were illegal. They were illegally obtained. Eventually they admitted to that, and a judge ruled as well. Earlier, we're filming this in June, so last month in May, a judge at London's highest criminal court ruled that those warrants were unlawfully obtained, and so they were forced by the court to give back my devices. And now, so of course, people are now very aware of that very high possibility that those devices could be bugged in some way. I'm not going to use those devices, but the point is, I mean, they've all been replaced anyway, but the point is we were able to stop the police accessing the files, documents, contacts, phone numbers, all the stuff that's on these devices, to protect my sources, to protect my journalistic sources. And they say that they didn't access those devices. Now, are they telling the truth about that? Who knows? But the point is, even if they're lying, they can't use anything in any kind of court. So we've done as much as we can to resist what looks to me like basically a fishing expedition.
Yeah.
Be careful if they give you back a pager that you didn't have.
Yeah.
But maybe this is toxic positivity. But have you felt like, well, I'm doing something right if they raid me?
Yeah. Yeah. But look, I'm not going to pretend it was a fun experience. It wasn't. It was. It was. It's not a nice thing to happen. I mean, and for my family as well. And just practically, like I mentioned, it takes a while to get back on your feet. But yeah, a lot of people have pointed out to me, and I felt as well that it does show you kind of on the right track. What's the truism about journalism? That journalism is reporting something that someone doesn't want people to know about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if they're going to this length to stop it from happening, then it is a kind of a sign. And also, like, to look on the positive side as well, like it shows that there's a kind of sign of desperation on their part, right? Because it's not only about me as an individual, as a reporter. It's number one. It's like I said, I do think it was a fishing expedition for those for my contacts, like activists, I've reported on people like Palestine Action who've been involved in direct action. There's that, but it's a sign of desperation because this genocide has been going on for, the heightened genocide, as you put it, has been going on for the best part of 2 years, really. More than a year and a half. We're well into the second year, and yet, and it's horrific, and yet the resistance to it, the global resistance to it, has not stopped. It hasn't been sufficient, but it hasn't stopped. And, acts of solidarity and support and resistance in the West haven't stopped. And the authorities are basically doing everything in their power, including these kinds of raids against activists, to shut it down. And they haven't been able to do it. And so they're kind of desperate to the point where, they've done this illegal raid against me. So it was good to win that legal victory.
Yeah, I think you're hopefully setting a precedence there.
Yeah,
hopefully. And I mean, we will be talking about weaponizing anti-Semitism today, but this is also, I think it's connected. Like, this is weaponization of everything they have in their power. Weaponization of media, weaponization of the legal system.
Yeah,
whatever they have, they are using it because, as you say, they're desperate. I mean, this is like when it's live streamed in your phone, all this is happening. They have to either stop it or do everything they can to undermine the narrative or change the narrative, as you say, or scare people, as you said, because it's like, yes, like obviously I'm not downplaying how terrible it's been for you, but like, you are a public figure, you have Electronic Intifada behind you, you got people's support. But like for every case like that, there's at least 10, 20 other people who no one knows about. And
exactly.
They're kicked out of their job or whatever. I mean, life-threatening sometimes. See, people got killed for this. I mean, like, we don't talk about it, but like, people have been murdered because of this.
There's been a lot of cases in the UK of quite similar raids and even arrests of activists. And I've talked to some of them. Right? Sarah Wilkinson is even one of the more relatively high-profile ones. Actually, there was no mainstream media coverage of it, but there wasn't of me either. But there was at least a level of media coverage in terms of pro-Palestinian media, online media, and so forth. And even a Scottish newspaper wrote about me. Sarah Wilkinson had a similar amount of coverage as me, but then there's other people all around the country, like activists who are like known locally, who are involved in rallying solidarity for Palestine on the local level, organizing people to come down to London for demonstrations, supporting in their local area, supporting solidarity for the Palestine Action, direct actionists who have been involved in, shutting down arms factories and so forth. All these kinds of things. So they're known locally, but they don't have a national profile. And quite often those people, the most chilling thing is when you kind of hear about, well, this has happened, you kind of hear it on the grapevine through a text message or something, and people haven't even posted about it on social media because they're kind of afraid. They don't know whether they're allowed to even post about it, especially when, these so-called counter-terror police have got extra powers. And so they're sort of worried that they might make it worse by posting about it. So it has a very chilling effect, all these kinds of things.
Yeah, and go ahead.
I just imagine people listening might be a stupid question, but I think it's easier for people to understand why these kind of raids are being done in Israel. But why is it so important for European countries to stop people who try to stop the genocide? Why is it so important?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I was just listening to a podcast interview with the Palestinian analyst Moin Rabbani. He was on Radio War Nerd, and he was talking about this, like, why is Israel so desperate for public support? Like, why does that make such a difference? Like, why do they care so much about people criticizing them in the West? Like, why is that? And he made the point that Israel does. Like, he was comparing Israel to other sort of client states or proxy states of the United States empire, and he was saying that they're a kind of unique one in the sense that if you compare them to somewhere like Qatar or Saudi Arabia, what has Israel got? They don't. Qatar has got natural gas reserves. Saudi Arabia's got oil reserves, and they have these billions and billions of dollars that they can shell out to for example, the Trump administration in bribes, right? Like, effectively legalized bribes, like this Air Force One that the Qataris have just sent to him. But Israel just effectively takes military aid, like takes weapons. And so what does Israel have? Like, it doesn't what does it have as an asset to the United States empire? And the answer is not a whole lot, but it has this, and that is why the issue of public support in our countries, in the United States, North America in general, in Europe as well, is so important strategically to Israel, and it always has been. And what you see historically, if you look over the decades, and this is a point that we've made on the Electronic Intifada for some years now, and Moin Rabbani was making a similar point, which is that Israel is much in the United States. Israel is much more of a partisan issue now, where it's sort of the right wing side of the mainstream political spectrum, which is viewed as more pro-Israel, whereas 50 years ago, I think on both sides of the Atlantic, in terms of the United Kingdom and the US, it was actually the so-called the mainstream social democratic, I don't think you can even call it let's say progressive party, so the Democrats and the Labour Party in Britain, who are actually more pro-Israel than the Republicans and the Conservatives, and that's for various historical reasons. But that is completely flipped now. So the Democratic, I mean, for the first time now, there was this recent poll a couple of months ago showing that for the first time now, the population of the United States is more pro-Palestinian than pro-Israel. But that's a trend that's been part of a long-term. That is a long-term trend, because it's for around a decade now. That's been the case already for more than a decade in the Democratic Party base. Obviously not the leadership of the Democratic Party. The leadership of the Democratic Party is as pro-Israel as ever, and arguably is even more pro-Israel than the Republicans in some ways. I mean, they sort of compete with each other to kind of outdo who's the most pro-Israel. But in terms of the voter base, it's a complete loser for Democratic Party voters, which I think is a big factor in why Trump won this second term. So the issue of public support is really important for Israel, because they're kind of trying to keep their finger in the dam, because how long can they keep this support going? And Israel kind of uniquely relies on this kind of outside support.
Yeah, I mean, they've themselves said that if the US cuts the weapons, they have 3 days left or something like that. So they just simply can't. Yeah, so they definitely need the support.
Yeah, I get that they need the support, but why is it so important for us to give it to them?
Yeah. Well, I guess it will be connected to our topic. So why is anti-Semitism weaponized? I mean, you wrote the book on this, which was not so long ago published, I think. Is it what? Where is it? We didn't.
Let's see.
Show it. Maybe my screen is cut. Yes, that's the book. Exactly. Great cover as well. And the undertitle is How the Israel Lobby
Brought Down Jeremy Corbyn.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess you could say that it's a case study of a wider Western phenomenon.
Yeah.
Because we've been seeing it very actively in Sweden, especially quite recently. which we can talk about later as well. But I don't think people know so much about Jeremy Corbyn or the Labour Party. So could you sort of paint the context of it?
Yeah, sure. So Jeremy Corbyn, he's a political leader, political activist in Britain he's really, I mean, if you look objectively as politics, he's a moderate social democrat. You know, he's somebody from that sort of Western European social democrat tradition, effectively. But because in the and in what happened in 2015 was unexpectedly, he became the leader of the Labour Party, Britain's Labour Party, which was at the time in opposition, and had just lost an election to the Conservatives. And his campaign was it was an insurgent campaign, which was driven from the bottom up. So it was very from the membership, and actually from quite a lot is made of like his base of young members who kind of joined the Labour Party to support him, and that's true. But there was also actually a lot of older members who had become disillusioned with the Labour Party during the Tony Blair years, the neoliberal years. And had left the Labour Party or had, become inactive, and were reinvigorated and rejoined the Labour Party. So there was this kind of populist grassroots campaign to get him elected. First of all, it was only to get it, and this was within the Labour Party's internal elections or primaries, you could say. First of all, the campaign was just to get him on the ballot paper because it was viewed as such an outside chance. And Jeremy Corbyn was somebody who was, and this is something I explain in the first chapter of the book, he was somebody who was deeply involved in Britain's popular progressive movements. He was somebody who's known as an activist. He, was involved in the anti-racist movement. He was involved in campaigns against austerity, against the privatization of assets in this country, against, for example, the railways being sold off. So this is the context within which he came to become the leader of the Labour Party, because basically the population was sick of 35 years of neoliberalism, whereby the Labour Party had become even more to the right wing than the Conservative Party had been in the 1970s. And there was this kind of neoliberal elite consensus, but actually the general population was really craving for just very simple social democratic policies that would have been the mainstream consensus in Britain in the 60s, in the post World War II era, effectively in the 60s and 70s, of just a moderately supportive welfare state, publicly owned assets, and a generally peaceful foreign policy. And those were Jeremy Corbyn's policies.
Quite similar to how Sweden was actually in similar time periods before the 90s, I guess. That would be
right.
Yeah. But also he was very involved in the anti-war movement against the Iraq War, right?
So this is how Jeremy Corbyn was different from Bernie Sanders, for example, was that he was far more of I don't think he would really describe himself this way, but he was certainly far more, relatively speaking, of an anti-imperialist than Bernie Sanders. So he was very strongly involved in the anti-war movement. He was one of the founders of the Stop the War Coalition, which campaigned against the invasion of Afghanistan, against the invasion of Iraq. And he was also, and this is the crucial point of my book, I mean, I explain all this in chapter 1 of the book, but the crucial point is that he was involved in the Palestine solidarity movement and had been for many years, and is still, he's leading part of the demonstrations in London, campaigning against the genocide in Gaza. And so, because of that last point particularly, he had made, for all these things, he'd made enemies amongst the political establishment. But for the most part, he was just viewed as by the mainstream media in this country and by the political elites, he was viewed as and smeared as a left-wing extremist, like as on the far left. But actually, he wasn't on the far left, unfortunately, from my point of view. But he was, he was a moderate social democrat with anti-war and progressive foreign policies. But all of a sudden, when he's being it looked more. It went from like this outsider chance to become a leadership candidate for the Labour Party to becoming an actual the front runner for the leadership, and eventually winning that leadership campaign in September of 2015. There started to become more and more smears in the mainstream media against him. And they were kind of searching around for the most effective strategy. And the most effective strategy that they settled on for the long term, for the 4 years of his leadership, 4 or 5 years of his leadership of the Labour Party, was to smear him as an anti-Semite, or was to somehow associate him with anti-Semitism, or at least to say, well, he's not doing enough against anti-Semitism amongst his supporters and all this kind of stuff. And the reason they were able to do that in terms of the establishment of the Labour Party, the mainstream media, and so on and so forth, was because of the pro-Israel lobby, because the pro-Israel lobby were already, in the UK, were already very, very aware of Jeremy Corbyn. And the reason for that is because the pro-Israel lobby generally, but especially in this country, is very obsessed with trying to control political policy in terms of the elite levels, in terms of the corridors of power, in terms of executive boardrooms, in terms of just they're concerned with power in a way that the Western left, is often very, very let's say naive at best on. And he and so even though he was only a backbench MP and he was never a minister, and he was always opposing people like Tony Blair, who led Britain into the Iraq War, so he didn't have any power in that sense, but he had popular power. And the Israel lobby opposed him because he was an MP, and even one MP sort of, he wasn't the only one even at that time, but just even a small handful of MPs saying critical things against Israel, organizing meetings for the Palestine Solidarity Campaign within Parliament, just things like that was intolerable to them. So they'd already started smearing him years before.
They always want to nip it in the bud, right? Exactly.
And I compare it in the book to the domino theory that US imperial planners had during the Cold War, which was that even one small socialist country in Latin America, or like
Far East Asia, Vietnam War, they also talk about, in that sense, like the real reason was that they didn't want any socialism anywhere in
Vietnam, Cuba, even a tiny country like Grenada, in the West Indies, an English-speaking country, which had a communist revolution in the late 70s, and so they had to overthrow Maurice Bishop, the leader of that revolution. And it was all part of, even though they were a very small country, it was the threat of a good example, and that these small dominoes could lead to wider effects. And so they have to stamp these things out before they become a threat to them.
Yeah. When we talk about Israel lobby, like you have in the beginning of the book, you have this list of acronyms. And when I saw it, I laughed out loud, because it's like, there's 15 different lobby organizations with different names, some of them with Jewish in the beginning, some of them not at all, but they all serve the same agenda. Do you want to talk a bit about that sort of, I don't know what to call it even, but they have these different paths that they take, they cover the entire spectrum, an attack from all sides. I don't know if it's coordinated or not, but like effectively it becomes a coordination, right?
Yeah, this is the page you're talking about at the beginning.
Yeah,
These are not all pro-Israel groups, but most of them are. These are the acronyms I use in the book. Just because there's a lot of acronyms in the book, and this is only really a small number of them. These are only the ones I get into in the book. Academics like David Miller have really documented that there are hundreds and hundreds of Zionist organizations, pro-Israel groups in the UK alone. And they're not a monolith by any stretch of the imagination. And they have their own interests. They sometimes have competing interests. So they have different political tendencies, within the spectrum of Zionism. So some of them view themselves as liberal Zionists, which I would say is, and I mean, to me, if you look at it objectively, that's really an anachronism. And anachronism, it's a complete, not just an anachronism, it's a complete contradiction in terms, like it was never really true. So, but I think, the right-wing Zionist groups tend to be a bit more frank about it, about their genocidal intent, and they disguise their language less than the sort of liberal Zionist side. Some of them as well, like one of the main subjects of the book, the Jewish labor movement, presents itself as the Jewish labor movement, like that they are a labor movement, that they're a movement of workers who are Jewish within the Labour Party. But, if you look objectively at what all these groups do, they all have a unity of purpose in the sense that they're all supporting the project of Zionism. So, in other words, a Jewish supremacist state in Palestine, in historical Palestine, in all of historical Palestine, or at least, the majority of it. So, they all have that kind of unity of purpose. And in terms of the coordination, there's varying degrees of it, right? So some of these organizations are just pure freelancers and activist groups with small budgets, and they go all the way up the spectrum to organizations like the CST, which is the Community Security Trust. This is another one of the main subjects of the book, which is, I don't know, I suspect you would have an equivalent group in Sweden, although I don't know what it is, but the equivalent group in the United States would be the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. So this is the CST is an organization which has a multi-million pound annual budget, tens of millions of pounds, and a large part of that actually comes from the government, from the British government. But it works, and I've documented in my reporting over many years how it works very closely with the Israeli government, even including Mossad, the Israeli secret intelligence agency, overseas intelligence agency. These groups have, most of them, or the majority of them, certainly the larger ones, do coordinate their activities with the State of Israel in one way or another, and we document how that's the case. Some of it comes in the form of funding, some of it just comes in the form of what they would sometimes term intelligence sharing. They often even use that kind of language, where they talk about a war, and that the battlefront is. There was an infamous article in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, about a decade ago, where there was a report from inside the Israeli embassy in London, where the Israeli reporter, saw recounted seeing a map of Britain as a battlefront, and that the battlefields were the campuses, the university campuses, and other venues and other forums like that, and that they have this kind of warlike mentality.
So what did they do in the end? I mean, we didn't explicitly say, but can we talk about what this coordination led to?
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, it was a massive smear campaign against Jeremy Corbyn, and it was about more than Jeremy Corbyn. This is the key thing. It wasn't to say that Jeremy Corbyn was personally an anti-Semite, although eventually they did say that. From about 2018, they did start saying that. But at first, they were quite cautious. They wouldn't, in terms of, in 2015, 2016, most of the time when these Smith stories came up, they didn't say, and they didn't say that Jeremy Corbyn was personally anti-Semitic. But what they would say is, well, there's a problem with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, and Jeremy Corbyn's not doing enough to stop it. He needs to condemn it, he needs to disavow it, and he needs to expel these people.
I want people to think, just especially the Swedish audience, like how exactly the same language is adopted in the attack against the Left Party here now.
Interesting.
It's, just mapping one to one. It's so crazy.
Yeah. So and the reason for that is there's two reasons, right? First of all, they couldn't just straight away say Corbyn's an anti-Semite, although, as I said, they did do that later. But they had to start with this kind of roundabout strategy for two reasons. First of all, is that Corbyn was, as I said, he was also a long-standing part of the anti-racist movement in this country, and it actually had many long-standing relations with lots of prominent Jewish left-wing activists. So there's that, and just the fact that it was ridiculous. The whole idea of Corbyn being anti-Semitic was ridiculous, so they couldn't do that for the most part, at least not initially. And the second reason is just because of the reality of the Corbyn phenomenon and the reality of this kind of left-wing populism in general. Is why has it been successful to the extent that it has been successful, which is not that successful considering it hasn't really got power anywhere, although it came very close, probably the most closest in France. But why the reason why it's had this any success at all is because it was a grassroots campaign from the bottom up. It rallied its political power in a mass movement, and that mass movement can't be defeated by just smear stories in the media, and by the political elites are opposing it, because the whole point is the general population in the West, and certainly in Britain, by and large, hate. Who do they hate and distrust? Politicians and the media. Like, who reads newspapers anymore? And they're viewed with skepticism for very good reasons, right? And so, that's not going to work on its own. It needs to be deeper than that. So you have to smash a mass movement. And how do you smash a mass movement? Well, the only way is to turn it against itself. And how do you get them to turn against itself? Well, mutual recriminations. Like, the left is very good at mutual recriminations. And so you plant these kind of stories, and instead of attacking Corbyn at first, they went for people around him. They went for people viewed as close to him. Like, I start with, there's one chapter where I talk about students in Oxford University who were viewed as his, his supporters and activists who had played a role in getting him on the ballot at Oxford University and so forth with the local MP, and were trying to, gain influence within Labour Party institutions, student institutions and youth institutions, the youth wing of the Labour Party, because they understood that, just having a left-wing leader in a reactionary political party is you're onto a loser there. If the leader alone can't take it over, you're going to have to build political power within, take over the institutions, as it were. And so when they tried to do that, it didn't really work, because they were always smeared as anti-Semites. So the people around Corbyn were smeared as anti-Semites. And unfortunately, this set up this negative dynamic whereby Corbyn started denouncing anti-Semitism. Well, what's wrong with denouncing anti-Semitism? Well, there's nothing wrong with denouncing genuine anti-Semitism, but what would happen was that he was called to denounce something that wasn't anti-Semitic, that was a pro-Palestinian statement, or a statement against Zionism, a statement against the state of Israel in some way. Perhaps sometimes these statements were crudely expressed, but then, and sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were just completely legitimate. Most of the time, really. Really, what ended up happening was that he and his team, especially the people around him within his leadership team, ended up denouncing a lot of good people who really hadn't said anything anti-Semitic at all, or at the very least he didn't stick up for them. And then what that meant was people around him started getting picked off one by one. And then by the time it came round to 2020, after he'd been succeeded by Keir Starmer, who's now the current Prime Minister, Corbyn was himself purged from the Labour Party on exactly the same issue, on weaponised anti-Semitism. And there was really no one left in the Labour Party to defend him at that time, because so many members had been kicked out or pushed out, purged directly or indirectly in one way or another. As many as 200,000, according to some reports.
200,000?
Yeah, so like 200,000, there was... I'll get the exact reference to this because Owen Jones was questioning this recently. So Rachel Reeves, who's now the finance minister of Britain, the so-called who we call the Chancellor
of the Labour Party, for people who do not know.
Yeah, she's they're now in the Labour Party are now in government under Keir Starmer, so she's now in government. She's now the finance minister of the country, and I can't find it right now. I'll have to.
No worries.
I'll send it on to you later, but
it's in the book.
It's in the book. In 2000, the year 2000, or possibly 2001, I can't remember, but not long after, in this period, in basically the defeat period for Corbynism within the Labour Party, Rachel Reeves was asked about Corbyn being kicked out of the Labour Party over a statement he'd made, and he'd made a very, very tame statement where he said, which actually in my view didn't go far enough. He said that we did do a lot to combat anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, but the extent to which anti-Semitism was actually happening in the Labour Party was exaggerated by a lot of our political enemies. It was words to that effect. To me, that was like a massive understatement at the very least. But that's what he was kicked out of the Labour Party for. And so, I mean, he was effectively kicked out of the Labour Party, but he's still an MP now, actually, as an independent. And in the last election, he ran another insurgent campaign, but just for his own local seat. And he successfully became an MP again, an independent left-wing MP. And so what Rachel Reeves said was that, she was questioned in an interview. I believe it was with the Financial Times. It's in the footnotes, but they said, look, here's the Labour Party's membership figures. The membership figures have gone down a lot. What do you think about this? And she said it was a good thing. Because they were obviously, it's the Financial Times. They're not like supporting Corbyn, but they're saying they're looking at it from a monetary point of view. Because ironically, for the so-called fiscal conservatives who criticise Corbyn for being, whatever, irresponsible spending tax money or whatever, he actually left the Labour Party in the black financially. Like he left them with more money. In a good financial state. And why was that? That was because there was a massive membership increase during the Corbyn years. Hundreds of thousands of people joined the Labour Party to support Corbyn and his popular, social democratic project. And that meant, obviously, most of those members paid membership dues. So the Labour Party had lots of small donations, leaving it in a good financial situation. But because the Labour Party, especially in the Keir Starmer era, but even before Keir Starmer, has to be said, at the end of the Corbyn era, when Corbyn had a lot of bad advisors around him, there was this process whereby there were expulsions. Now, there wasn't 200,000 expulsions. I'm not saying that, but there was examples made out of people who were suspended, expelled, or disciplined in some way in the party, and these were very high-profile cases. So, and it was done high-profile on purpose to set an example for people. You know, in a similar way to how the police are trying to set examples of people like me now. And people, as many as 200,000 people ended up leaving the Labour, either being kicked out or leaving in one way or another, you know, at the end of the Corbyn era.
I'm shaking my head so much because it's exactly what's been happening to the left party here. Because, like,
interesting,
they pick, as you say, a high-profile guy or a woman, doesn't matter, and then smear her, take her out, and then obviously people react to that, as you say. Like, people say, okay, if this is what you are, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I mean, there's an example in a municipality, Fredrik, Christopher Lundberg, I think he was called. He was head of one communal branch, and then they basically kicked him out because of his support for PFLP, more or less. So the entire branch just said, well, we quit because of this. So yeah, it's quite crazy. I mean, like,
but at least at least they're standing by him. And that's a good thing. Like, but the problem we had was too often the Corbynite left, for want of a better phrase, they didn't stand together. They didn't have this solidarity.
This was a very exceptional case. I mean, most of it is just there's so little solidarity. But, like, okay, so I think that's a good segue to my next question is, like, how could they have handled it differently? Like, Corbyn and the Labour Party left. Like, what do you think they should have done? I have my ideas, but...
Yeah, well, this is the subject of the last chapter of the book, but, you know, there's no easy answers, and, you know, he might not have been able to have won no matter what he did, but in one word, solidarity. There should have been solidarity where it was missing, and that includes defending people who you, on principle, even when you don't think what they said was strategically very good, you know. And I think that's the correct thing. That's the only correct thing to do. Like, why are you kicking someone out of the party because you think, oh, that's not very good PR? So the example that I use in the middle chapter of the book is Ken Livingstone. Ken Livingstone was another one of these figures. I mean, he was a towering figure within the Labour Party, on the left of the Labour Party. And he was someone who was very similar to Jeremy Corbyn in the sense that he was marginalised in the Labour Party by the Labour Party establishment for many years. He was the first elected mayor of London, and he, in the 80s, he was actually a real thorn in the side of Margaret Thatcher, the right-wing prime minister. And he was also, you know, a thorn in the side for the establishment of the Labour Party, because you know, they often threw him under the bus, and actually he as well was the Labour Party establishment in the early 2000s. They tried to basically gerrymander the internal election so that Tony Blair's own preferred candidate would become the Labour candidate for Mayor of London. And Ken Livingstone said, well, I'm going to run as an independent anyway. And he won. He actually won. And then they asked him back into the party because they saw how popular he was. And again, he had sensible, popular left-wing policies, progressive policies. You know, he introduced the congestion charge in central London to reduce traffic and improve air quality in London. You know, there's a popular bike hire scheme, which his Conservative successor takes all the credit for, but was actually Ken Livingstone's policy. Just lots of things like that. But Ken Livingstone was on the left of the Labour Party, and he was, by the time the Corbyn era started in 2015, there was very few left-wing people within the with any kind of elected power, like very few MPs who were on the left of the Labour Party. There was only a small handful, and Ken Livingstone was no longer, he was no longer the mayor of London, so he didn't have any elected position, but he did have a very small internal policy making role within the Labour Party, within the NEC, the National Leadership Committee, which sets the rule book. And more importantly, in some ways, he was one of Corbyn's very few supporters within the Labour Party who had any access to mainstream media, because he'd spent 8 years, I believe it was 8 years, as the elected mayor of London. He had a national media profile, and they couldn't ignore him. The mainstream media couldn't ignore him, and they had a duty. And he was out there on mainstream media, on radio, on TV, saying, "Yeah, I think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great prime minister." And there's very, very few people with that kind of political influence and media influence who were out there doing that for Corbyn. And so they had to get Ken Livingstone, and the way they got Ken Livingstone was when the anti-Semitism, the phony anti-Semitism campaign started. They were really trying to get him on that, and he had a radio interview. And in the radio interview, I have a whole chapter detailing it. And actually, the appendix of the book is a transcript of the radio interview in question. And in the radio interview in question, this pro-Israel radio presenter, her name's Vanessa Feltz, she started questioning him about this phony anti-Semitism campaign, although she obviously claimed that it was real, and what they were talking about certain historical questions and so forth. And Ken Livingstone brought up the issue of the support of the German Zionist movement in the 1930s for Nazi Germany, which is a historical fact. And I devote a whole chapter to how it is a historical fact. And that was it then. That was basically, Ken Livingstone was then suspended from the Labour Party. What he said was factually true, but there was this massive national media scare campaign about it. And it was like, Jeremy Corbyn must denounce Ken Livingstone, etc., etc. And unfortunately, Jeremy Corbyn kind of did. I mean, he didn't. He just said what it wasn't like a strong denunciation, but like it was enough. It was enough, basically.
Did something politically expedient at the time.
Yeah, and it didn't really help him, to be honest, because it was never going to be enough for the Zionists. Like, it was like, oh, you've got to, they sort of suspended him as a member and tried to kick it into the long grass and hope to deal with it later. But that was never enough for the Zionists and for the pro-Israel lobby and for the mainstream media. It was, well, he has to be kicked out of the Labour Party. And eventually he was kind of pushed out, which is a very, very sad end to, a really legendary progressive political career. Yeah. Like, Ken Livingstone was, when he was first involved in local politics in London in the 80s, the Greater London Council, before it was the elected mayor of London, he had lots of national media scare stories against him because he was a progressive local politician who was involved in trying to promote anti-racist campaigns and pro-LGBT campaigns at a time when mainstream national newspapers would just use slurs openly. Like right-wing tabloids like The Sun would openly use slurs against people of colour and lesbian and gay people and so forth. And Ken Livingstone was really battling against that, and he was demonised for that. And then he ended up being demonised within his own political home. It was a very, very sad end to his political career. Yeah,
it's really tragic. I hope someone from the left party is listening and taking notes, because this is where it's going to end if they don't fix their shit. Sorry.
Yeah, and the key thing here is that it didn't help Corbyn. No, exactly. Thing, right? His advisors and all the people around him and all the people like Novara Media and Owen Jones at the time were all saying, oh, well, this is what Aaron Bastani of Novara Media said to me once was, oh, I think we have to box clever on this issue, and what he said was out of context, and we've got to be a bit more clever about what we say publicly. Well, did it help them? No, it didn't help. It didn't help them because they suspended Ken Livingstone. Did that stop the issue from happening? Did it make it die down? No, it just encouraged them because they were like, okay, we've got him. We can get anyone. We can purge more people. Yeah. And I said from the beginning, and lots of grassroots activists said, it wasn't just me. Lots of people were saying, in the grassroots, were saying, it will end up with Corbyn himself, and we were right.
Yeah, because they smelled blood. I mean, that's what happened.
Exactly.
So there's a huge role the media played. I mean, I've followed this at the time as well, so I remember. I remember how Guardian was reporting on this, how terrible they were. They were supposed to be this progressive outlet. How people I mean, this is nitpicking maybe, but people like David Mitchell or even Frankie Boyle, everyone was.
Yeah.
It was insane. I mean,
it was the liberals and the so-called progressives more than anybody else. This is the thing. The Guardian. I mean, I have some statistics on it in the book. The Guardian had more negative articles about Corbyn than even the right-wing newspapers, because of course, the right-wing newspapers, they're going to be opposed to the entire Labour Party regardless of who's the leader. But it was seen as a battleground for people like the Guardian, who ended up, supporting Keir Starmer, and even people like who I've already mentioned, Novara Media. Originally supposedly an anarchist organisation, or at least is led by a lot of people who used to be at least sympathetic to anarchism. Owen Jones, who's now very, against the genocide in Gaza on his YouTube channel and so forth, and has done some good work, I have to say. But at the time, he really stabbed Corbyn in the back, and crucially, all these people were driving this fabricated anti-Semitism campaign really more than anyone else, and that was actually more damaging than the Times or the Telegraph, the right-wing newspapers attacking him, because of course they're going to attack him. But what that meant was it led the right-wingers to say, well, even Owen Jones is critical of Jeremy Corbyn on anti-Semitism. Even Erin Bastani is saying such and such a person has to be kicked out of the Labour Party, and Owen Jones is saying, grassroots activists like Jackie Walker have to be kicked out of the Labour Party. I briefly joined the Labour Party, and when I was suspended for my, as revenge for my reporting, suspended as a member, Owen Jones welcomed that. But the thing is that's not about me. I'm not that bothered about that.
Can I just put in a very basic question again? Why are the media, mainstream media, so pro-Israel and pro-Zionism?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I think part of the reason is just the history of Western imperialism, and that the mainstream media is, certainly in Britain, is, it doesn't really. If you view the role of journalism as I do, to question power, to hold power to account, and to for peace and justice in the world, really the role of the mainstream media in Britain ends up being the opposite of that for the most part, because who controls it? Well, the people who control it are corporations, so of course they're going to be, for the most part, in favor of capitalism and state power, Western state power, and so there's those structural issues there. And Israel is, in a lot of those circles, is viewed as a project of Western power, which is true, which they're correct about. But the difference I have with that is that I think that Western imperial power is a negative thing, and they think it's a good thing. So, for example, of course, one of the main reasons Israel was able to be established on the mass in 1948. On the literal mass graves of Palestinians, by driving out hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homeland, expelling them in the Nakba that began in 1948. was because of, it didn't just begin in 1948. It would happen because of the Balfour Declaration, which was the British Empire's policy statement that they would, in effect, hand Palestine over to the Zionist movement, a project of Western colonialism, essentially. You know, Zionism, yes, it's a Jewish movement, but it's also when it began, most of the settlers and almost all of its leaders were Europeans. So it's a project of, in that sense, although it's also understood as a project of Jewish supremacy, which I think is true. But in a sense, it's also a project of Western imperialism. So that's one major factor. A second major factor, in my view, is the pro-Israel lobby. So the Zionist organizations and pro-Israel organizations, think tanks, some very, some even with charitable status in Western countries, organized to try and stop any criticism of Israel within the mainstream media, within political echelons, within any institutions within public life in Britain, either through kind of scare campaigns, smear campaigns, political terror in a way, trying to get people fired from their jobs, basically. And now, as we mentioned at the beginning, even to the point of weaponizing so-called anti-terror laws to try and get people like me raided or arrested, or journalists or activists, weaponizing anti-terror laws against people like that. And it works on all levels. So within the mainstream media, quite often these organizations are infiltrated by Zionists. I mean, this is a reality. Zionists, in terms of their political ideology being very pro-Israel, probably often themselves actually sometimes even being Israelis themselves, or at least having family connections within Israel, or at least or even to the extent of having close relations with the Israeli intelligence services. I've been very critical of Owen Jones, and I will continue to be very critical of him when he's wrong, which is a lot of the time, it has to be said. But he did do a very good article recently for Dropsite News about this phenomenon although he probably wouldn't put it in the same terms as me, but on Dropsite News he did an article about the BBC and how it has this very influential figure editor named Rafi Berg, who basically has a veto power on large parts of the BBC's coverage of Palestine and of the Middle East. And Rafi Berg is, as far as we know, he's not an Israeli himself, but he certainly has a very intimate relationship with the Mossad, and it's detailed in that article. And so, it works on all levels. But I mean, a large part of it is just simple cowardice, really. I mean, there's nothing, although, they could, reporters within the mainstream media could face political and professional repercussions for speaking out for Israel, and some of them definitely have. They could get away with a lot more than they do. But on the same side, the threats to people's careers within the mainstream media if they speak out on Israel are very real. Like, I think the reason Owen Jones was able to write that article, it seems, was because of it seems he had a lot of sources within the BBC who spoke out about it and were really sick of the situation. There's also a popular radio presenter on LBC, I believe her name is Sangeeta Maiska, who was fired very shortly after she gave a critical interview on air to an Israeli government spokesperson. The station is now denying it had anything to do with that, and one of her former colleagues, James O'Brien, is trying to insinuate that it was because listening figures were falling. From what I've seen, the data doesn't actually bear that out, and that's really a kind of smear campaign against her. But yeah, there's no doubt that those repercussions exist, and that the Israel lobby it's not all powerful. Like, it doesn't have its way about everything, but it has an influence, right? Like any kind of like massive PR operation. PR is maybe not an oversimplification. I think it's a bit more multifaceted than that. But like, if you take the example of a PR operation of an advertising campaign, the advertising industry is worth billions of dollars, and these corporations don't put those billions of dollars in because it has no influence. So of course, all this money going into the pro-Israel lobby is gonna have an effect.
But can we help people if we're a bit pro-solution? If people are afraid to push back on these things, how can you tackle weaponized anti-Semitism? If you give people some tools or some strategies or something?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the number one thing is solidarity. And can I swear on this podcast?
Yes, I did. I did before you came on.
Go fuck it.
Yeah.
And then the number two thing is telling them to fuck off. Like, seriously, like, in whatever language you want, but like, just calling it out, basically, like saying that, okay, like if Jeremy Corbyn is not going to literally tell people to fuck off. That's not his style. But he could have said, well, of course, for example, he could have just said something like, well, of course, we condemn anti-Semitism when it happens, but what you're asking me about, e.g. Ken Livingstone or whatever, what you're asking me about is not anti-Semitism, and you're only questioning me about it, and I'm only being attacked about it because of my support for the Palestinians, and then change the subject to the Palestinians, because that's what this is all about. It's about the Palestinians. It's about a way to sabotage a solidarity movement and a popular left-wing movement, which is going to be supportive of that solidarity movement. That's ultimately what it's about. I mean, I've always thought that the left needs to use some of the tactics of Donald Trump.
Doubling down.
Yeah, exactly. Double down. Use the powers. Use Trump's powers for good instead of evil. Double down because number one,
it works.
Quite often when Trump. It works, exactly, it works. Often when Trump is, Trump's usually wrong when he's doubling down, but it still works for him. Yeah. So Jeremy Corbyn was right, and so if he just doubled down, I think it would have worked for him more often.
People need to learn to, people have to practice on saying, when they're accused of anti-Semitism, no, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
And then just don't apologize.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I think that's a good tactic.
It's so multifaceted as well. Like, it's not just that people are afraid of repercussions. That is definitely true. But I think it's also been so pervasive that people are like self-indoctrinated or self-censoring as well.
Of course, yes.
Like they think, this is probably wrong.
Yeah.
Like, they think, and they just steer away from the conversation. So.
Yeah.
So we need to work on this as the
people are afraid of use the word Jew.
Exactly.
Talk about Jews.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, and I think that was a big part of why it was so successful here. Yeah, definitely.
So before we move on, like about the media's role, there is also, like, maybe we could say that it's on the other side of the coin. There was this Al Jazeera documentary that was supposed to air, but then was pulled off. But thanks to you and Electronic Intifada, it was aired on Electronic Intifada. It's called The Lobby, I think, right?
The Lobby USA. So what happened was there was 2 undercover investigations that Al Jazeera's investigative unit launched into the pro-Israel lobby. One was, and the investigations ran in parallel. One was in the UK and one was in the US. And the UK one came out in January 2017. And it was very successful, it was very effective, and it actually even made a few mainstream media headlines in the UK. It made a front page, and it was an ongoing story for a while. There was an Israeli so-called diplomat in the Israeli embassy, although he was really a spy, who was sent back to Tel Aviv because of it. There were questions asked in Parliament, and it caused a lot of problems for the pro-Israel lobby having their activities exposed. It probably, I mean, in retrospect, it's quite possible that it helped Corbyn survive another year or two. And so that was the UK, and the US one ran, like I said, it ran at the same time, but for various reasons their source was burnt, and the pro-Israel lobby realized, hang on, this happened here in Washington DC, and they realized who the undercover source was. You know, it was, in both cases they were Al Jazeera journalists who went undercover within these pro-Israel organizations, and they were very effective. The one in the US was a man called an Al Jazeera reporter named James Kleinfeld, a friend of mine. He's an excellent reporter, and you know, he basically, you know, Americans love the British accent, and he's a very smart guy. He speaks lots of languages, and he's very young. And they were like, "Oh wow, there's this Zionist young guy, speaks Hebrew and all German and all these languages, and this, oh, we really need him. We're going to put him in charge of lots of things." So they did this brilliant investigation, but unfortunately, and it was all ready to air. It was all, and I reported on this, on the reasons for it being happening. What happened to it? It was all checked legally. It went to all levels at Al Jazeera. It was all vetted. But unfortunately, what happened was, because the undercover journalist's identity was exposed in retrospect too early, the very same Israel lobby that the documentary was the subject of set about doing what it does best, which is putting pressure on Al Jazeera, putting pressure, which is obviously is run by the state of Qatar. And funded by the Qatari royal family, ultimately, in one way or another. They put pressure on Qatar to drop it, and in a nutshell, that worked. And actually, the pressure was very, very extreme. Like, there was even at one stage there was even talk of a invasion of Qatar using mercenaries, and now around about the same time. Now it wasn't only to do with the documentary. There was also, you know, this was early on
during the blockade, was it?
Yeah, exactly. It was early on during the first Trump administration, and you know, there's all these issues with Jared Kushner where he was trying to, you know, he had this shady real estate deal that he was trying to get the Qataris to finance, and they didn't want to do it, and he wanted to punish them. And so it wasn't only about the documentary, there was all these other issues. And of course there's a massive US Air Force base in Qatar. I mean, exactly. Doha is basically a massive Air Force base in a lot of ways. So it wasn't only about the documentary, but the documentary was one factor, and it ended up being a casualty, but we did manage to obtain it, and you can still watch the whole thing on our YouTube channel, and it's very good, you know.
Yeah, you should definitely go check it out. I did want to talk about the parallels to Sweden. I think it could be interesting for you as well, but like especially for our audience,
tell
because
me.
Like I wanted to, like, there's this organization called SKMA in Swedish. It's Swedish Committee Against Anti-Semitism. I mean, they're not obviously Zionists, but if you just look a bit carefully, you understand that yes, they are Zionists. I was wondering, okay, so what did they write anything about Corbyn and all this we've talked about? And they actually did. At the time, I think it was 2020, right when he was kicked out.
Right.
They were quoting bits from the EHRC report, which is Equality, Human Rights. What is it again?
Equality and Human Rights Commission, yeah.
Which is what exactly? It's like
it's a I mean, it's a government-funded organisation whose role is ostensibly to protect equality and human rights for racial minorities and other minorities in the country, but actually, it's really kind of become the opposite of that. Like, it's to promote inequality and lack of human rights. No, I mean, it has actually come under a lot of criticism in recent years for really even discriminating against its own black and other minority ethnic staff, and really not protecting black people really in any way. And there's a lot of problems with it, but really it played a role in going after Corbyn as well.
So they were supposed to investigate for more than almost 2 years, I guess, right? About systematic anti-Semitism within the Labour Party.
Yeah.
And they couldn't find it because, I mean, exactly. I know all this because I've read the bits from your book about this. Because if you read the SKMA article about this, they do cite the report and paint a picture of like a tip of the iceberg. There was in the report the accusations were only the tip of the iceberg. There's much more, whatever. And then there was this insane citation from the report that I thought it was, I mean, insane but also hilarious at the same time, which says something like, anyone should be allowed to air allegations of anti-Semitism, but if anyone challenges them to be false or treat them as a smear campaign, that in itself is anti-Semitic, because it's the classic trope to paint Jews as conspiring to manipulate the world. This is what Corbyn did.
It's that's exactly why he was kicked out. And exactly, it's a completely catch-22, complete circular logic. Like, if you say, this is what they always started with. It's just the assumption that it's anything to do with Palestine is anti-Semitic. Or just the assumption that, of course, there was anti-Semitism problem within the left, and then when you say, okay, well, what's the evidence for that? That's immediately treated as like that in itself as an anti-Semitic statement.
You just gave me evidence.
They did that. They did that, and that's what the HRC did as well.
Yeah,
and that was what Corbyn, like I said, the Corbyn statement that I was kicked out or pushed out for that I mentioned earlier. That's what he was saying, you know. He was just saying, well, it was exaggerated a bit.
Yeah.
You know?
And I mean, they also, in this article, they mentioned, generally the left in Sweden was against this, but the editor-in-chief of ETC, which is like the Guardian wannabe of Sweden, he endorsed it. He was like, yeah, this was the right decision. It's like, yep. Yeah, I mean, he, for me at least, he has outed himself as a liberal Zionist, especially since the Al-Aqsa flood.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, he was that before as well. That's like obvious now, and it was funny to see. It was funny to see it from this article. We could wrap up, maybe. Maybe. I mean, we talked about already what. Like, you have takeaways how to tackle this, like solidarity, especially.
But what has actually been happening in the left party then? People are being kicked out.
Yeah, I mean, it's been like that for a while now, since the fast track genocide started. Like, it started smaller, like on lower levels. I mean, very similar to what you've just described. Actually, it was like started with some local members, including Palestinians, like first of all Palestinians actually, that got kicked out because they shared something. They shared, like, one of them was, he shared this cartoon with Netanyahu drinking like Gaza as a blood drink, whatever.
Bloody Mary.
Yeah, exactly. Something. I mean, something like that. It's like, this is
a blood libel. The blood libel. That's
exactly the blood libel bullshit. Exactly. Someone else was, this was something about Illuminati. I mean, it was whatever, like things that, like, very small detail in the thing that he shared. There's this Illuminati thing. That's anti-Semitic. And then it just kept getting larger and larger. And then there was this local branch leader who got kicked out because of his open support for PFLP. And then the latest one was the largest one. One of the members of the parliament, the elected members of the parliament, got kicked out because she reposted Bisa Nauda, the journalist from Gaza, where she herself reposted what's his name, the models and their father, Palestine.
The Hadids.
Yes, exactly, Mohammed Hadid. She shared Mohammed Hadid's post where he has this puppet, like Israeli flag, sort of controlling U.S. politicians and whatnot. And Bisan had a comment on top saying, "Well, it's actually the other way around."
Interesting.
The fact that she shared this, the parliamentarian,
that's insane. I mean, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, even if she'd shared the other thing, which showed that Israel controlling America, why would you have to expel someone for that? Like, okay, like, have the debate. Do you know what I mean? Like, have the discussion.
Prove me wrong, motherfucker.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, even that is like a valid read of
with the lobby and everything.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't agree. I agree with Bisan that it's the other way around, but it's a hard case to make.
Yeah,
the dog affects the tail and the other way around. Either way.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I think. I'm always a bit. Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because I'm always a bit frustrated by that whole debate. I mean, it's not one or the other. It is both. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we talked with Justin Porter about this exactly, and his point was there's no dog.
Exactly. That's it. It's a bad analogy in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah. They're this one and the same. So it's like, Anyways, go support Asa's work. You also have your Substack, but you also write in Electronic Intifada. You're part of the live stream. You've done. I mean, from the beginning, you've done amazing work about the Hannibal Doctrine, the mass rape hoax. All of that. I mean, we could do 3 more episodes with you, and we would be just covering parts of it.
Still just the tip of the iceberg.
Exactly, the real tip of the real iceberg. Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, you're most definitely welcome back. Anything else you want to add?
Thank you. No, I'm happy to come back anytime I can do it. Yeah, it's electronicintifada.net. At Electronic Intifada or at Intifada on various platforms.
On X, it's at Intifada. On Instagram, it's at Electronic Intifada.
That's right. Yeah, and
on Truth Socials.
Yeah, we should start. We're not on there yet. We should be. And I'm asawinstanley.substack.com, where I put all my articles on there, and I put things like this on there. So send me the link after this, and I will.
Absolutely, and we'll add all the links as well. Anything else you want to say, Fredrik, to Asa before we let him go?
Oh, it's just a privilege and a pleasure, and hope to talk again sometime.
Thanks for having me.
Take care of yourself.
Okay.
You too.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ja, är du nöjd?
Yeah. I think we're gonna have like an outro, Asa.
Okay.
So you have to leave now.
Before I kick you out. Yeah, exactly.
When we trash talk you, actually.
Say hi to the good folks.
I will. All right. Thank you. Bye.
Mysig ju.
Ja. Det var fint.
Walesare var han det?
Ja, precis. Ja.
Känns som bra.
Vad tyckte du?
Ja, men det är jätteintressant. Alltså jag var inte alls så insatt i det här, så att för mig var det också bara så kul att få lära mig om hela den här snurran. Jag hade liksom inte... När var det ens?
Mellan 2015 och 2020.
Ja.
Jag följde det då, och det som frustrerar mig så jävla mycket är att det händer exakt samma sak just nu. Och jag fattar att vanliga folk kan inte det här.
Nej.
Men folk i Vänsterpartiet, hur kan ni inte det här? Hur kan ni inte se att det är exakt samma sak som pågår? Hur kan ni inte inse att...
Men det är ju masspsykos.
Ja, men liksom om man är en politiker på denna nivå, alltså de har ju en fucking styrelse. Eller hur? Där de sitter och diskuterar saker. Hur kan de inte inse att, ja men titta, det här har hänt tidigare. Exakt samma sak har hänt. Och det hjälper absolut inget att ge efter. Man måste stå på. sina fötter. Och,
men det är som att liksom låta en mobbare liksom trycka ner huvudet i toaletten på högstadiet. Alltså, slut måste du slå tillbaka.
Precis, ja. De bara ger mer pengar åt mobbaren, helt enkelt.
Ja.
Would you like my brother's lunch money as well?
Ja, exakt. Ja, men bra gäst.
Ja, tack. Jag tyckte, alltså det är inte bara för att liksom det här hände och det här händer i England och titta vad hände i England. Det är inte det. Det är liksom, det är väldigt aktuellt som vi ser. Det är en upprepning av det hela. Och just för att det funkade. De ser att det funkade, så de bara applicerar exakt samma sak. Och vi har ju det där med list of acronyms, att det var liksom en lista med jättemånga olika organisationer med olika namn. Vi har ju det i Sverige också. Judiska centralrådet, Judiska ungdomsförbundet, SKMA, bla 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 bla. Liksom, det är en variationen också. Och sen ska folk bli utbildat av SKMA om antisemitism. Att Vänsterpartiet nu ska göra det. Liksom.
Det kommer funka tills de två verktygen implementeras. Solidaritet och fuck off.
Ja, precis. Ja, men jag håller helt med. Jag tror att det är bra avslut på det här.
Tusen tack för idag. Vi hörs snart igen.
Tack själv, det gör vi. Ta hand om dig.
Grymt, kul som fan.
Tja.
Eller intressant. Ciao.
Ja, hej.